Welcome back to The Truth in This Art. Thank you for joining me for my conversations bridging arts, culture, and community. I am your host, Rob Lee. Today, I am super excited to be in conversation with my next guest, an accomplished arts educator, artist, and advocate based in Los Angeles. She is the founder of Adding Voices, a conference focused on arts education for people of color and allies. Her work emphasizes social justice and anti-racism in education. Please welcome Flavia Zuñiga-West. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You can tell I scripted that. I wrote that. I tried that.
Yeah, no, that was definitely written out, but that's okay. I appreciate a good intro. If you don't have a good intro, like what's happening? Because if someone's not trying to hype you up, you're like, wait, why'd you even ask me to be here and kick it, right?
100%. It's the thing. You have people like fumble through their things, and it was funny because I was like, yeah, I already did my intro, and I was like, I'm just gonna redo my intro. I was like, I gotta pop out and show.
You got to pop out and show.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you're not like us. Yeah. All right.
So, and again, thank you for coming on the pod. And to get started, I think it's just customary to give folks the space to introduce themselves in their own words. As I said, this is scripted, this is written. It's an amalgamation, a cut and paste, if you will. But I think hearing who the person is and sort of how they choose to describe themselves and what their background is and introduce themselves is important. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to do that.
Oh, all right.
Improv.
Okay, all right. I'm Flavia. I'm a proud daughter of an immigrant. I'm a Blaxican. I'm an artist. I'm a maker, a creator. I'm a mother. I have ADHD, which I think is my superpower because I can like hyper focus and create amazing things and then, I don't know, chill out the next day. I'm a certified geek. Science fiction is where it's at, like Octavia Butler. Let's talk about it all day, every day. Sci-fi nerd for sure. Yeah, I love what I do. And I'm grateful for every opportunity in each day to do what I do. And that's teaching young people and connecting with young people and sharing my love of art and letting them know that the practice of art is, I don't know, somewhere in between, I would say, finding one's voice, freedom, and an absolute sanctuary. So yeah, that's me. What's up?
Yeah, we're definitely going to be tapping back on some of those items, and thank you for sharing that and doing that intro. And you're giving me like more rapid fire questions. That's the thing. When you don't have them, I start adding them as you'll see me typing. And it's like, oh, you're a geek? Mm-hmm. So tell me about all of the Star Wars people, or all of the this, or all of the that. It's going to be some geek questions that's going to pop up.
Oh, I'm game. Like, bet. Let's go.
But before we get there, we have to get through, and we'll get to sort of the main crux of the conversation today. So I think we look at the beginning, we look at sort of our personal journeys that kind of direct why we engage in what we do, and those sort of the introduction, the intersection of arts, culture, and community. I do this. It's really interesting timing. I have been a podcaster for 15 years, but for the last 5, I've done this podcast, talking with folks that look like me and you, and really thinking that sort of arts is an entry point and then really growing it. But the root of it, the basis of it, was someone who might be on the news a lot, was talking very spicy about Baltimore, someone who's a color. And I was like, I don't like that. I don't like when people kind of down the city, because it feels like you're downing the people there. You're downing the community there. And there's so many stories, and kind of diving into that a bit deeper, you find like there's so much creativity. There's so many unique personalities there, and being able to explore those narratives. So when you look at your background and you look at your personal journey, how's that influenced you to pursue, arts education, and specifically focusing on Black and brown folk?
Okay, that's a good question. I'm going to kind of riff on it. I don't know if I have like a succinct answer, but I think that ancestors always have a role in what we do, right? Like those who come before us. Something my brother and I always say is that we stand upon the shoulders of giants, right? And that's being a daughter of an immigrant whose family came here for education, right? So that's my mom's side of the family. And I am a daughter of 2 educators. So I never planned to be in education, but it's a calling, you know, it's a vocation almost, I think, to teach. But I think that happened because of the unique circumstances we often find ourselves of being the only one in a space, the only one in a classroom, the only one in a job. And my parents were those only ones. They were, in a sense, beginners in social justice work, particularly in private independent schools in Los Angeles. And I attend now and teach at my alma mater intentionally. And that was the place where it all started, but then it had to simmer some, you feel me? But I was the only one in an independent school, like as in like one of the only Black identifying students, let alone Latinx identifying students. And you know, when you don't see yourself, it's a difficult thing. But I loved art, and art was always this place of freedom and exploration or escapism, all wrapped into one, right? It was my safe space.
Sure.
And I think somewhere between that and being at a school that had affinity groups. So like affinity groups, if nobody knows what those are, right, are spaces for different communities, right? So if you identify being Black, then you're in the Black kid club, right? You identify being Latinx, you're in that club, Asian American club, Pacific Asian club, like SWANA, like we can get real specific, LGBTQIA plus, like we can go on and on. So we had affinity groups at school. And so I was part of BLACC. And our school, with the help of my father at the time, we would attend something called the People of Color Conference. That's from the National Association of Independent Schools. And they had a portion of this conference that was just for students called SDLC, Student Leadership Diversity Conference.
Sure.
And I went, I want to say maybe 15, 16. And I think that was the game changer. You know, when I look back on it, it's not a clear set story, but yeah, that entire conference for students, I'm going to read a blip from it because like I couldn't remember. So it says SDLC focuses on self-reflecting, forming allies, and building community. Led by a diverse team of trained adult and peer facilitators, participating students develop cross-cultural communication skills, design effective strategies for social justice praxis and practice through dialogue and the arts, and learn the foundations of allyship and networking principles. So this is where I learned how to have difficult conversations and to learn how to talk about myself and explore and understand the facets of my identity. And I think interact with, I mean, like being an Afro-Latina, I think I think without knowing, right, I've been living this life of, intersectionality, but not having the word. And then eventually, you know, you go to school and things, you get the word to explain what you're experiencing. You're like, why is everyone treating me different? Why are these things colliding? You're like, oh, it makes sense now. It makes sense now. I got it. So what I mean to say is that I think that very early on in my teen years, I had this experience that was life-changing, meeting all these kids who wanted to talk about what was up in the world and talk about who we are and how that affected us and have difficult, uncomfortable conversations. And then I didn't really touch that for like a minute. And then, I don't know, undergrad, I have a BFA in drawing and painting from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago with a focus in fiber and material studies, okay? And when I'm in this program, I start realizing how few people look like me, how few professors I have that look like me. So I consistently am interacting with wonderful professors, but who are telling me they don't understand my work. And what I come to find is they say they can't understand my work because it doesn't make sense. And my work is about being a Blaxican, right? And where the code switching and the immersion and the melding occur in my everyday life. Like Blaxico, in a sense, what I explore in my artwork is like a real place, right? Like I live it every day. It's with my family and my children and my parents. Like it vibes all day, every day. And so I was trying to find ways to explore this using weaving, using subversive forms of creation that women have always used in a sense. So, and people of color, particularly Black women, right? So I was quilting, I was embroidering, I was finding these ways of communicating what I was feeling through them. I got you, don't worry, I'm gonna circle back. So all this threading, this weaving leads me to be like, what the hell am I going to do with my life? So then I go to NYU to get my master's in museum studies because I'm like, I need to get a job, right? Like I need to find a way to be around art all the time, but not lose my love of myself, of the world, etc. So I get, I go into museums and the same thing happens. I see nobody who looks like me, no one who can talk to me about what I'm doing. I consistently am feeling alienation, right? And seeking community and wondering what's going on. And this continues today. For the majority of art programs, grad programs, it is very rare to find that many students of color, teachers of color, because 80% of art educators are white and female. And that's like a statistic you can literally grab from the National Association of Art Education. So the only one is what made me think I needed community. And that's kind of how all this happens, I guess, is the best way to answer that in some strange way.
No, see, one, here's the thing, right? One, you've made my job a little easier because you kind of started answering part of that follow-up question, that second one. So, 'cause I noticed you saw my, I was like, hold on, you're answering my second question. This is my job. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I was just like, oh, great.
Apologies. All right. All right.
No, absolutely not. It makes my job easier. Makes me like, damn, that was a really good question that I asked.
It was a good question. I was like, shit, to try and sum that all up. Excuse me, I don't know if I can cuss on it. Okay, cool. I'll be good.
No, we keep it real here. We keep it
All
real.
right. Right.
Um, and thank you for that because I think it adds a lot more texture in it. And sort of like as in my day job, I'm a analyst. So when someone throws out factoids and data, I'm like, yeah, tell me more.
Yes.
And it gives good context as to, at times for the visual, because people don't believe me, I'm a large black man. I'm 6'4". So,
You
you
don't look 6'4" in the screen, I just want to say. But okay, so you're a tall
know,
man. You stand out. Everyone be noticing you up in some spaces. I get you. Yep.
there are times, and this is just an example, and it kind of you mentioned sort of the to paraphrase, not seeing yourself represented in the spaces that you're in. There are I will say there are instances where I might do something that is going out, going to see somebody's work, going to see a show or something like that. And if the room doesn't look like me, I'm like, I have those dynamics. I've dropped some weight, but I'm 250 as well. So I'm like a large black guy, what have you. And I noticed sort of the energy is a shift of like, are you the bouncer? Are you this? Are you that? And one that comes to mind is a couple years ago, but it sticks out because of what it was connected to. I was one of the people being honored for doing this podcast, for one of these sort of wins, right? And it was sullied because I'm getting in the line, I'm there with my partner, we're going in, and one of those, maybe she was one of those curators, who knows, was like, oh, can you scan me in? I got a lanyard on saying winner, and she thinks I'm security and then treats me as such. And the owner of the venue and my partner had to course correct that. But the preset was, you're beneath me, was sort of how it was treated. So I always kind of carry that as, yeah, you're invited, but also make sure you keep yourself. Don't fall for it, I suppose, or don't fall for this
Mhm.
could be weird, and be around your people ultimately, be around the people that you're most comfortable with.
Yeah, I think that comes to a couple of points. I'm so sorry that happened to you, first of all. I've had many experiences of being assumed I'm the help. Often of times in those situations, like I'm the caterer or, like I like those kind of moments. I think that often the message is this space isn't for you, right? And I think this space isn't for you comes particularly from an issue of inclusive practices, particularly within the museum. So I go through my museum studies program. It's a focus on curatorial studies. I land the diversity, internship at where was I? At MoMA, right? The Museum of Modern Art in New York. So I'm like super excited. And I meet this wonderful person named Ross. Ross and I are the only Black people in this entire cohort. And we just look at each other and look at each other. And you don't know, like not all kinfolk be skin folk, right? Like not all skin folk or fin folk. Blah, blah, blah. Not all skin folk are kinfolk is what I mean to say. And
Yes.
when you notice that, you got to be careful, right? When you're in these spaces. But like we eventually get along really well. And like it's all unspoken, but continuously we are experiencing um I don't think there's a such thing as microaggressions. I feel like they're all macro because it's my fucking body in a space that's feeling violence due to your language. So like the word microaggression, I'm not really a fan of, but aggressions, we'll call them that. And it's like when it becomes, I don't know, when whiteness is so indoctrinated into culture, and when we talk about culture, high culture, low culture, art culture, that
Mhm.
people are unaware of what they're saying, right? And so decentering whiteness becomes so much larger, particularly I think in the art space, because the art space also comes with money, right? And we understand so much that the access, right? Like the currency is the currency of the realm up in here.
Yeah.
And the fact that, you know, these systems of oppression are very clear. So it's a you're not welcome, you're a guest. And we used to be on display. Right. That's what makes, you know, Beyonce's music video, right, inside the Louvre so like absolutely like ape shit. Like the reason why it's ape shit is because like our bodies are in it taking over, like on top of all these objects that you cannot touch. Yet we were always touched. We were always weighed, right? Like we were viewed as chattel, right? So I think there's so much of the museum where that tension keeps coming because we used to be on display and now we're making all the work and all the hotness that absolutely everybody wants. And so now we live in this performative DEI world with the arts world, trying to suss it out. And it's tricky. But I'm sorry that happened to me, but it happened to me a lot. That's why I left museums. I was like, this is too much. Like, not to say other spaces don't have their problems. I was like, I don't know if I have the patience, I think is the right word.
Mhm.
Um, and the ability to bite my tongue. My mama says that's been a problem with me my whole life, but like I'm a talk backer, you know. Thank you, Bell Hooks. There's a whole book about it, but like talking like raised that way is that way. Like I'm gonna say what I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I get you.
No, I appreciate that, and I encounter it. There's different things at times, and I like the way that you call it. It's just aggressions. It's just aggressions, and
What's micro about it? Like you're like, so I was getting an award. It was
right.
a big deal. I was all hyped up. I told my family, everybody knew.
Yeah.
And then that one moment was so violent and aggressive to like the entire evening for you.
Yeah, and the last one I'll share is similar. Before I move into this next question, is similar, and I think I was better equipped for it because I had some time, right? And having that instance and then having maybe a year and a half before this follow-up instance, that were these sort of huge moments that, commemorative moments, right? Where, I'm at this thing, I'm getting this, award. I'm one of these like winners of this large amount of funding and all of this different stuff. And I had a dude before I go up there. He'd asked to be on the show, but then all at the same time told me what my did was not work or journalism. It was just mid. And I was just like, what are you aiming for here?
Her.
It's like, do you want to be, what do you want to be? And I was thinking about it. I was like, I could wring this dude's neck right now. That was literally, and the kicker was, it's like, it's almost gamesmanship where, let's say someone's taking a free throw. I don't know if you watch basketball, but someone's taking, free throws.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
And
people.
someone tells you, like, you're going to miss those, right? It was kind of that. So the dude says this to me before I have to go up there and speak about getting this huge award to this big group of affluent white folks that are the funders for this thing.
Mhm.
And I had to keep all of mine. I was like, I know how to do this. I'm good at this. I still might wring this dude's neck, but it was one of those things where, I wasn't comfortable in this idea. I, hit it well, but wasn't comfortable in this idea of speaking to a room filled with white folk about money they gave me for my little project where I speak with black and brown folk. And that was it was a thing. And I was like very aware of all of that. And I was like, I'm not gonna do the on display thing. I'm just gonna speak in a way that's like, this is me. This is just what this is, and be brief in it and move on to the next thing.
Yeah, well, I think that's the difference between charity versus solidarity, right? That's the problem when people keep approaching, interacting with communities that have literally been affected to systemic oppression as this act of charity. When you're like, it should be solidarity, you should be right there with me, like, this is messed up, we got you. Here's this, and let's celebrate it. But I get you. Yeah, you have to swallow it, you compartmentalize it, and you put it up over here.
Yeah.
And you know how to, for lack of a better, like code switch, right? And I think that's also generational. That code switching be generational, and it's learned behavior too, right? Because and people act like they're like, well, how come white people, someone was like, how come white people don't do this? I'm like, you don't have to interact it like you can come into any space that is ours almost like with very few, I mean, there's some spaces you can't come into, but like for the most part, y'all can show up wherever you go. But access to the majority of the things that we need, we have to intersect into your world, your neighborhood, your, like your business, etc. So it's very different of how we need to move through spaces. And a reality of violence, whether I think that's emotional, psychological, or physical, is a very real thing. And especially for you, if you're a 6 foot tall, like large Black man, like that's always in your mind, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a real thing. But you started off saying someone was talking ish on Baltimore. The fact that y'all have Jen White Johnson as like a Baltimore resident, like they just need to be quiet right there. The way that that woman is like the most epic mind and creator and you know mothering as a form of resistance, being neurodivergent and having a neurodivergent son, like that woman changed my life as a mother of a child with autism. Like she's the GOAT. Like that's called someone changing up the art world right there. Like on juxtapose the rest of it, like the past, I want to say like 4 years, she's been blowing up. If she hasn't been on your podcast, I will happily introduce. Like she's incredible.
I would love that.
Yeah, Baltimore not being no.
It's Trumpito. It's those Trumpisms thrown in.
I know, sir. I know who you're
Yeah,
talking
uh-huh, uh-huh.
about.
Um,
Whether it's DEI persons, you know that, right? I'm a DEI person. The types of persons who are DEI is right here.
100%. So as I'm moving to this next question, and I think kind of what we've talked about a bit gives sort of the flourishing context around this, but as an artist, as an educator, as an advocate, what aspects of like community building and social justice continue to inspire your work? And I think it's fairly obvious, but I at least wanted to ask the question.
That's interesting that you say it's fair. I think it's meeting people, I made a whole bunch of memes before I started the first, well, so the first Adding Voices conference was in 2020 and it was online, okay? And it was virtual. And I know you got questions about that later, so I won't mess with that. And then then I get offered to offer it in person. And Moore College of Art and Design, their director of art education, right, of the grad program is like, do you want to host it here? We got you, we'll fund it. I'm like, bet, let's do it. Like art school, the rest of it, great. So, I start making memes and, trying to advertise and marketing. Like it's a one person show here, right? Like I don't like, it was like, who's doing that for you? I'm like, it's her. Let me just change my clothes or a hat. Like it's me. And I got the full-time job and the babies. But my point is so I started making memes where it's like, when you see another, art educator of the global majority, right? When you're like, oh, it's you. And like the way we gravitate towards each other when you're in an all white space, right? Because you feel uncomfortable because you watch everyone schmoozing or making immediate connections or a way to hang out with Susan and whoever, and they doing their thing. And you're looking around being like, oh, damn, right? And you are on the corner, on the walls, and we're not wallflower people. We know this because if you put us in a cookout, we're not on the wall. Most of us are not on the damn wall. So you're like, got the vibe, you're uncomfortable, you feel alienated, and then we find each other. This innate need to find each other. And I think I started meeting people after having the conference and just in general being like, I know nobody like me. Like, and not the need for like this we think the same way kind of indoctrination. I just mean that moment of feeling community where someone welcomes you openly and lovingly and sees the world and the impact they can make similarly, right? Does that make sense? It's like when you want to lift each other up, there's no bullshit, for lack of a better word. So I think for me, it was meeting people and they're like, yo, we're friends now because of your conference. We link up and kick it all the time. And I'm like, that makes my heart sing, right? Or like people who tell me like, you don't understand, like I'm the only one at my school. I'm the only Black educator at my school. And then I'm in the arts. So the way that the arts is already disrespected, let alone them being a Black person teaching it or someone who's a Latinx person teaching it, they're like, it's lonely. And the loneliness can eat at you.
Yeah.
And it makes it scary if you're actually trying to talk about the issues in the world, or trying to help students become critical thinkers and start assessing, why do we only talk about old dead white guys? You ever thought about like why?
And it's,
Why are these the names that you know? Why can you repeat the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles solid, right? Like Raph, Leo, Mikey, like the whole crew, right? You got them down, like, you know, like solid. You can maybe name like Georgia O'Keeffe, and then you just struggling. And then if you're lucky, someone's like, there's Basquiat, and you're like, okay, cool, 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 cool. And
yeah,
like, that's where you end, right? So, but yeah, I think it's the need for community, the hunger, and often the alienation that comes with it. You know, that's a real part of, I think, why.
it makes a lot of sense. And you know, I was teasing that out, and definitely we're on the same page. That's good. It's good. That's what I was thinking. I was just like, hmm, hmm. And you know, I may have listened to another podcast that you were on, and I was like, I gotta ask this question when I was like doing my research. 'Cause I do research as well, you know.
Okay, okay, because I was like, I was listening to the podcast. I was like, okay, what's the vibe? What's happening? All right, what do I need to know? I was like, all right.
Thank you for doing that, because you'd be surprised. A lot of people will get on just like, I haven't listened to your thing yet. I'm ready to talk though. I'm like, all right, you got it.
Yeah, no, you got it, because you got it. Mm-mm. Yeah,
So speaking on students a bit,
yeah.
you know, sort of like with the work that you're doing, the work that you're like, that you're spending a lot of time, energy, and toward, how do you like see you helping like students hone their artistic voice, especially in the context of like social justice or what have you? Is it the community component? Is it the I've seen it and I'm an educator, so I have this lived experience piece? Speak on that a bit.
Mm. I think that's complex, as most things are. Um, So I teach a lot of different students, and I'm grateful for that. So I teach literally my students, which is like the middle school age, seventh, eighth, and ninth grade. And then I also teach undergrad, and then I also teach grad students. I'm often brought in to lecture, and I lead a lot of workshops on with teachers who are right now in the field. So I'd say in my classroom, it's letting kids know the power of art, right? Bell Hooks talks about how education is the practice of freedom. And I sit with that like every day. And she talks about the importance of art as a form of liberation. I'll find the quote in a minute. But she talks about the importance of art as this vehicle for voice and this vehicle for self-worth. And I think that's what sits with me, because I want my students at the end of the day to know that art is something that they can go to care for themselves. We're in a mental health crisis, right? Like that's also very real. And so you need the safe space. And if art is that vehicle for you to communicate and to feel, I think that's beautiful. On the social justice piece, because all those things, liberation is interlinked, right? We know that. That's communal care. I think showing them, like, so perfect example, one of my last lessons of the school year, we were like, we're going to do printmaking. Like, great. And I'm like, why do we care about printing? Like, what happens in the tool of printmaking? They're like, you can make multiples of something, right? And I'm like, right, well, what do you want to make multiples of? You know, let's talk about, so we talked about pop art before this, right? The idea of consumerism and mass production, and what do those things mean? And that comes into capitalism, and it's very interesting. And it's like, well, what do you want to say out loud a lot? Like, so I showed them a whole bunch of different posters about people who care about different issues. I said, what's an issue you care about? You know, that varied from every student. And that was everything from the environment, right, to I got a lot of people who are like, no, I'm a feminist and I believe in the fact that I should have a right to my body. They're 12. I just want to put this, like, everyone wants to belittle children and act like they don't know. They absolutely know. Or they're like unfair wages, or women not being paid equally, all of that. So I was like, okay, dope. Well, like, how are you going to make that? What's it going to say? How are you going to get your message across? Usually there's like a slogan, right? Or like the hit word that's going to come up when you see those things. And so all these kids did a little bit of research, and they came out with like the most fire stuff. It's on my Instagram, but like they came up with some of the most amazing creations. And all of it came back to empowering, right? So often when we talk about power and we are taught about power, our own lived experiences, it's power over somebody else, right? It's hierarchical.
Yeah.
And we often don't talk about the power within ourselves or the power with others, right? And the power to. And so like the power to change the world, the power to make someone think differently, the power within our collective community to create change, right? So they were teaching each other about each other's issues, and they were, in a sense, learning a whole new way about their classmates who they weren't particularly close to, all of them, because it's middle school, let's be real. They get along, they're kind, like we got a good classroom community building. But I think that's what was beautiful, was the critical thinking, and the empowerment that with their own creativity, with their own aesthetic, with what they care about in the world, they can say something. They can use this tool, because that's my job. I give you tools in your toolbox,
Yeah.
and then you create, right? So I think that's in the classroom. And I have some other instances of that. We did an entire piece. What was for me was them understanding how to work in mixed media, right, and sculpture. And they created pieces that were about water. And I talked about water scarcity, right? I talked about like water injustice. And I was explaining to them, I was like, hey, I want you to teach you about human rights, because you keep asking me all these questions in the classroom, which are making me, between you, like hella uncomfortable, because like I like not to say I can't speak my mind, but right, like I have this job, I need to do these things, like I don't need to tell all my business out there on my thoughts, like where, but education is also political, right? So like you're sitting there. And so like my way of speaking to these kids, and they're like, yeah, people keep saying human rights violations. What are human rights? And I was like, that's my entry. So we looked at the Bill of Human Rights.
Yeah.
And the kids were like, what is this? And they're like, not everyone does that. What about that? Like they were on top of it. And they're like, so everybody has to do this because not everyone does this. What do you mean water didn't become a human right till 2010? And I'm like, clean water and clean sanitation. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So every kid made like an emergency water vessel shape, right? But altered it and found a different country or place to research, and found a way to not only put the data, like the information on it, but also like decorate it and make it like a teachable art vessel, right? And I'd never made that before. I was just like, okay, cool, like let's do it. And that's the best part about teaching, where you're like, oh, I've never done this before. Like, let's go, let's see what happens. And when it becomes better than you actually imagine it, it's the most igniting, beautiful thing. But it's watching your students teach each other in the moment, I think, when I do this social justice work. Does that make sense? Which I really think is just teaching art and critical thinking. I know that is the label that we give it, but I think it's just really teaching. Like art has always been interdisciplinary, the arts in general, whether, like the performing arts, all of the arts. And I think that when we link those things for students, remind them that even though they're in these classes, like this is history, this is English, this is science, like when artists are creating, they're borrowing from all these different concepts, ideas, histories, information, data, and then creating something new. Like that's your job, is to synergize, right? And to create something to your own interest. And so to watch them do this, and I'll just end with, so I had this one kid, and he was like, Missy W, give me something. Like, give me like a group of people. And I was like, cool, pick Indigenous people in Canada. And he was like, okay, like bet. And I was like, all right, bet. So he does this amazing piece. Like, he's like, okay, game on, like challenge accepted. I'm like, cool, dope. So challenge accepted. His name is Sam Wise, by the way. He's the GOAT. I love this kid. So yes, Sam Wise. Yeah, facts. And so Sam Wise, who also loves all the geekery, so we vibe real well, is like, okay. And he creates this vessel. And this vessel, while he's looking for the data, everyone had to have a piece of data, right? That like literally connected it to unclean water and sanitation, right? To like give a fact, but to visually display it in some way on this like vessel. And he goes, he's like, I can't find anything. The only information I can find about unclean water for these tribes and these reservations is like so outdated. It's from the 60s. There's a few articles about it, but I can't find anything else. And then he says out loud to me, it's almost like they don't want us to find the data, because if they find the data, Missy W, then they have to do something. I took a sip of water, like that was a grab a Snickers moment. And the other kids were like, I've had that same problem with the blah, 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 blah. How come? And it was like, boom. And I did my job. And that's like, to me, I was like, I did my job. He's like, it's almost like, and I'm like, it's almost like that.
it's A lot of times, and I want to insert this. A lot of times, like as a newer educator, kind of educator, I'm resisting it, but I do it, I guess. And it's funny, and I'm like, and someone says, "Hey, that's Mr. Rob." I'm like, "Ooh, well, that's Professor Rob." But I use sort of what I do in my background, and I try to connect it to what they're doing, and definitely the critical thinking part. Like I'm a data analyst. I have that side as sort of the real day job, and it's very much my personality. But then I also do this. So it's bringing the storytelling with the data behind it and all of that. And it definitely there's overlap and it informs both things. And even improve some of the questions and how I ask those questions. So that notion of how things are linked together and how things connect. I'll ask folks like I've talked to chefs. I'm like, I know you did something creative. I know you did something outside of the kitchen that, as far as this lane of creativity. And you'll find out, oh, I'm also a musician. I was like, oh, tell me more. How do those things go together?
Yeah.
And I'll make these connections. So that version of thinking that's serving these questions and these unique insights, I've been applying that in the class to try to get over these ideas because, you know, I'm in it. I'm in the field. I'm in the sort of podcasting space, and I see how things are kept vague. They're kept rarefied. They're kept that folks that look like you and I can't quote unquote succeed unless we're doing a certain thing that might
Mm,
not align with our values.
mm.
I don't do the shucking and jiving. That's not really my vibe. And
No
I
minstrels here, sir. No minstrels here.
I find that I see the stuff that's getting pushed. Obviously, it has this, oh well, it's getting people's attention. I'm like, sure, but it's disposable. What are you really saying? I'm just like, this could be funny, this could be interesting, this could be something, but really, it's disposable. And
Mm,
it's like, I don't feel like it's representative of the culture. So I'm coming from that perspective when I'm talking with my students when they're building out their new podcasts. And I'm like,
yeah.
yeah, okay, sure, Club Shay Shay. Sure, we all saw the Cat Williams thing. And I was joking with them yesterday, and this is fresh.
Hmm.
I was like, how many mid podcasts talked about an entanglement a couple years ago? And everyone in there started laughing. I was like, don't make those. Have your own viewpoint. What's going to make yours unique? And
Right.
why are you doing this? Like really aligning to what that why is. Does this need to be a podcast or is this a conversation? And
Mhm.
looking at a podcast outside of that, looking at that as a version of anthropology, it's a moment in time. This is an archive, all of these different things. And they're like, oh, you take this really seriously. I was like, yes, I've done it for 15 years.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the other thing is consistently educating children that are and people in general
Yeah.
that like the arts is a field, like respect the technique, like let's put some respect on the name. Like it takes time to do these things. I've been teaching for I just finished like my 11th year teaching, but in terms of art making and the rest of it, like that's been a lifetime, like okay, we coming up on 40. I'm proud of that. But like I'm just saying, like it's, like you take time to cultivate these skills and to understand their larger purpose and meaning in historical context, right? To be able to do the micro and the macro when we look at something. But you touched upon something that I really appreciated where you talked about critical thinking. And it's like, it's proven. There is data from the National Endowments of Arts that students who are engaged in art education, they demonstrate higher academic performance, like 63% difference than children who do not take the arts. Like critical thinking is there. That's just academic achievement. But they're problem solving consistently. It's the problem is when people make the cookie cutter stuff that literally is an indoctrination into the child becoming what do I want to say? The factory worker, right? When you approach art making in capitalistic formats and you're like, and then we all do the stencil, then we all make the thing, then we all do it, and every art piece looks the same. You know exactly what I'm talking
I
about.
do.
And then when you go into the classrooms where all of them look different and you see some like, and it's like, and it's beautiful and it's a little messy and it looks like a child did it,
Yeah.
when it looks like a child made it and it's their ideas. And that's a whole new level. And when they have to problem solve, that's the beauty. Like, here are the materials, you got to figure out how to make this. And they're like, well, how am I going to do that? I'm like, figure it out. And that's what makes art classes like that. Those of us who are choice-based teachers, for example, and that's a spectrum in itself of tab teachers teaching for artistic behavior, where we get to enjoy watching that, like that problem solving and creativity. Because it's not someone going, you have to write a paper. There's this many words. Go. Because all you still got is paper and words. You feel me? Where we're like, Here's all the different ways that you can use cardboard and adhere it to a surface.
Yeah.
Here's all the things you can use for texture. What are you communicating with the materials you're using? Do you want that to be a subtext of the sculpture itself? And that's when you're building artistic process and thinkers and emotional intelligence as well. Like, so I vibe with that 1,000%. It's a beautiful thing to have that. And that's the kids in the classroom, to answer your question.
Yeah.
And then like the teachers in the classroom, like the ones who are beginning teachers or those who have been teaching for a long time, I think it's seeing art as a vehicle for change.
Sure.
And a real ability to have deep conversations. I'm gonna try and find this quote that I wanted to read to you because it's like essential. I feel like I need to
Yeah.
appreciate it. And
Absolutely.
then I'll stop trying to like barge into this.
No. And I'll do the padding thing that they say in podcasting, but I'll throw this out there where, sort of, I noticed when going back to sort of the high school experience, I'm like, I'm pushing 40, 30, 39. And, they told me I look like their dad. I'm like, this is a lot. And I was like, I don't have any kids. Like, this is a lot. And, I remember as I got to the sort of latter stages, I was like, you guys have been doing this. You guys have been doing podcasts. You got all of the structure and all of that. So I started just coming up with challenging prompts of, hey, we're going to have you guys who've not worked together. We're all going to go into the studio. You all have done work in the studio. You're going to do a 15-minute podcast. Here's your topic, and make sure you have these components in it. I don't really know how you get there. I'm not going to tell you who's the host and who's the guest and all of that. And you just see like, oh, you're giving us autonomy. It's like, yes, you're podcasters. Go forth and pod.
I respect you. I believe that you have artistic agency, you are bright, and you are capable. I am not from the top, right? It's like, it's literally just it's a pedagogical difference, right? That I am not like the all-knowing, like dropping knowledge into your brain. Like you're bringing stuff too. Like let's collaborate. And that's when the classroom truly becomes community and teacher gets to be a part of that community and your relationship changes with those kids and it's fire. It's the most beautiful thing and synergy that happens that you cannot describe to somebody else with young people, in my personal opinion.
100%.
All right, I found it. Okay. This pretty much changed my teaching when I read this. Art is now perceived differently than before. It is seen as a vehicle for change, as a force that can break down the boundaries and expose inequalities. So people of color and the poor are denied access to art for the fear if they get their hands on it, they'll write their own stories and understand the value of their lives. Let's expand on that, not just art, but education as a whole.
Inspire.
Right?
Yeah.
I read that anytime I feel lost. I'm like, what? I'm like, reread. Belle's got you.
And you just answered a bonus question right there. See, you're overachievers.
Can't help it.
So I want to move into sort of these last few questions that I have, and definitely we're going to go back. You touched on it, I like that you teased it. That's what we call in the industry a tease.
Okay.
Going back into adding voices. So give us the rundown. What is adding voices, and what inspired you to found it, creation of it, all of that good stuff. Give us the skinny.
All right. So Adding Voices was formed in 2020. So let me paint the picture. COVID, in terms of like the actual full-fledged like pandemic had just hit probably like 2 months ago before that. So I want to say Adding Voices, the first one was June 4th, 2020. So about, I don't know, April-ish, something like that. But I was thinking about it, and what I was doing, I was dealing with the world, like personally, like I was upset at the world, what was happening in the world. I was very pregnant with my second child, my daughter Artemisia, and I kept telling my friend, I was like, I should just make this this conference, and she's like, you've talked about this for a while, and I was like, yeah, like I want to do a conference or something where it's just art education. Like I've always had the beautiful honor of attending the People of Color conference, right? That is for teachers. And there's multiple different subject matters, but arts is very small, like, right? Like in terms of history or other aspects of, think about teachers broadly. And it's like this giant national conference that started off just being like a list serve. And then it slowly grew, right? Like, so that's cool. It's like it slowly grew out of a few people who are change makers, right? and they're the ancestors of the whole thing. Anyway, so I was like, okay, well, maybe I should do it, maybe I shouldn't. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. How do I do this? And my mom joked. She goes, you made your own professional development. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, you did, Mija. You were just tired. And I was like, yeah, I was kind of upset because I was like, I want to learn how to apply this to the arts. Like, where are the people who are having the conversations about social justice and equity, right? Like the Jedis out there, right? Like, where are those people? Like the justice, equity, diversity, inclusion folks, like the Jedis, right? Like, where are those people doing the work, but in art education? And I was like, I'm going to find them. So when you have a lot of time on your hands, you are pregnant, it's a pandemic, so you don't want to go outside, you end up reading a lot. So I was reading a lot, and I was reading a lot of critical theory and geeking out. And I was like, okay, like I'm going to learn about art education this other way. My background is not in art education, it's museum studies, right? So I was museum education, but that's different. So I started reading, and then I decided, like, okay, I'm going to do this. It's going to be online. It's going to be accessible. Everyone's going to be free. Okay. I'm like, what if nobody comes? And my friend was like, yo, if just like 10 people come, 5 people come, I still call it a win. And they're like, and then you just say it's a symposium. And I was like, word. So I think I called it symposium and not a conference the first time. So it was like worked around. And then I figured out who to ask to be the keynote speaker. And it's someone who was an editor for, what is it, Multiculturalism in Art Museums. It's a book edited by Dr. Joni Boyd Acuff. And Dr. Acuff works, I think she's now head of the program and chair of the art education program at Ohio State University. So I wrote a chapter in that book, and I was like, hi, I don't know if you remember me, but I was just wondering, like, I just like tried it. And she was like, yeah, I bet I would totally be interested to do it. So I got excited. And so because she is one of the most profound voices in the field, that helped me say she's going to be the keynote speaker. And then I found other speakers. So I ran an asynchronous conference. It was June 4th. So a month after baby girl was born. So I have about a 4-year-old son, and now baby girl has been there for like, a month. So she's like chilling. The time when I was still married, my partner like took my boy out so I could like run it. And I did like maybe an hour of synchronous, like, right, like, real time, like connecting with people. And I made it. But it was really figuring out, like, how do we stop cultural appropriation? Because I keep seeing it happening inside of all these classrooms. Like, we need to stop making like headdresses and things like that. Like, stop it. Like, it's not as happening in a lot of classrooms still, right? Like, stop that, and how can we move past the consistent trope of multiculturalism that it's this month, so we study these people, versus understanding that we need to undo this master narrative, right? And really change the way we talk about art and even the beginning history of art, right? So that's how it started. And I'll tell you, only like put it out on Instagram, did the thing, made the website, had good friends who had run conferences before, like talking to me and helping me. The GOAT, my friend Jennifer, she's amazing. She was like, do it. And, you need like some Black women in your life and daughters of immigrants to be like, just do it. Like, what's going to happen? You fail. And I'm like, you're right. So I did it. And then it was successful. So 10 people were signed up, right? And it was free. Not Trayvon, but like, Trayvon happened. So it's like, I've been thinking about this for a while, but George Floyd gets murdered. And all of a sudden, my little, like, you should join and come talk about social justice little art thing ends up with 400 people registered. Yeah. And I was like, what is this? And so, like, one woman show, right, with people being the Zoom link, like all the things. So I had like the website that had all the different videos from every single presenter loaded up on there. And then there was like the access. And then I did like an IG live. So that happened. And then people started asking me to be keynote speakers or lead workshops. And I was like, what is this? And then More College Art and Design, Lauren Stickler, who runs their grad program, was like, hi, I want to talk to you. I want to learn more about culturally responsive and sustainable teaching. Can you come lecture and lead a webinar? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so like, I found I really mean that. People are like, oh, you had this master plan. Like, no. Like, I mean, I was manifesting, you feel me? Like, I was hoping, but like, it just happened and it was beautiful. And I think it's because I did something that terrified me. When I was a child, I was very shy. No one ever believes that for the way I come off now. And I was like, I would barely talk to a soul. Like it was just me in a sketchbook, homie. Like I don't want to talk to anybody. I was terrified. And then it grew. And then the second and the third. So it's always been the collaboration of, I want to say, the global majority. So that's like the global majority is people of color, right? So I like to use that terminology more like when people say BIPOC, right? So like Black and brown peoples. I don't care where you're like the diasporas where you hail from, but like it's for Black and brown people. And so often in the majority of, I want to say, educational spaces or organizational spaces, we are the afterthought.
Mm.
We're not the forethought, right? Like it's not made for us. It's like, you can also come, you may attend,
Mhm.
right? And I think I wanted to shift and create a place and an environment where we come first, like creating a table. So that's what started. It was like, how can I find as many people of color, right? Like global majority people doing the work of art education. And that's where I come to the ancestors part. Like Black professors, Black teachers, brown teachers have been doing this work for a very long time. People want to be like, oh, EDI, like, right, all this, it's been going on for a whole bunch in the homeschool, right, homeschooling at home in different community centers, right, like this work has been going on. And it has also been subversive, right, because they're trying to keep themselves safe in these environments and protect children in all white environments, right, when those things happen, or in more predominantly white schools, right? So I think remembering that was really important to me. And it's like, who are these people doing it? Because it's a different experience when you are other, for example, right? And then in an institution that is still predominantly white, right? Like, because majority of our learning institutions are white, function on a premise that is based and indoctrinated into white elitism, right? Like college. um, Independent schools at times, right? Private schools, like these whole schooling in itself. And so it's a different lived experience to be who we are, walk the life, be with our own community, and then also find each other and give back. So I just wanted to create a space where we're welcome. So often we want to seat at the table, right? And like the Shirley Chisholm and be like, no. Like I don't even want to grab a chair. Like I'm just gonna go find a whole new table and invite like the other people can come. Like to think that we don't need allies or upstanders. I like co-conspirators. Like I want you to get in trouble. I don't want you to tell me after we've left the meeting that someone was out of pocket. I want you in that moment to be like, I'm really uncomfortable with the way you said this or that, right? So I think for me, that's where it comes from. It's creating a community space. It's feeling welcomed and being prioritized. And that happens in almost every aspect, though we can always improve, like within adding voices. So registration, for example, registration first opens only to the global majority and it's free for all students. Like white ally co-conspirators can't even like register until later.
Yeah.
We're like, why? And I'm like, they're like, that's prejudice, right? It can't be racist because that's so like, so I was like, I don't know. I think it's actually just being, equitable.
Yeah.
And they're like, why would you say that? I'm like, money and access, right? Like the ability to write the grant or have time for the grant or to afford to come to the conference itself. Conferences are very expensive. Like art education conferences or conferences in general, they're expensive. The registration fee, everything. Like the first time we did it, the registration fee was $25. And that also includes 2 meals. Yeah. And this time it's 50, but includes 2 meals. Like it's like lunch, 2 lunches, happy hour, and then a dance party. And then you're also taking in all the sessions. We pay every single presenter because it's not an extractive method, right? Conferences extract from you. They're like, let me make it super comfortable, uncomfortable, and complicated, first of all, to even try and propose your idea. Like, right? Like, let me create all this gatekeeping for you in academic language to not even be able to present. And then if you can do that, right, then we're not going to pay you at all. And then you still have to find your own way to get here. You still have to show up. We're not going to like make any kind of comforts for you besides telling you what your AV needs are. That's it. And for us, it's like there's a room where the presenters get to chill, because when you present, you're nervous and you need quiet and you need space. Everyone gets paid a little bit of a stipend to honor the fact that they're there. Like, thank you for sharing your knowledge. That's your lived experience. And I think so often that is not respected enough or appreciated, but that's also coming from a Black feminist lens, right? Like the lived experience, that is a form of knowledge, right? So I think, yeah, it's undoing extractive methods and it's creating like a home for people. So that's what we do, and a lot of communal space. So you don't have to be exhausted during a conference. Have you ever been to a conference and you're like, I want to see this, I want to see this, I want to see that, and you're like already exhausted by like 2 sessions, and you were like, I gotta make all these other ones, and you start falling into this workhorse, very much so back into the system format that doesn't deal with rest or rejuvenation. And I think for me, the template was, how can we restore one another and learn from each other? Like, how can we do both of those things? And so that's kind of where it started, or it lives now.
Well, thank you. No, that's not, one sounds amazing, and I love sort of the shift of it's taking in that lived experience. It's taking in and then listening into like, all right, is this the way we should be doing these conferences? Is this who should be included, or this who shouldn't be included or prioritized? And just applying things in sort of a different way. And it's just like being able to grow it and seeing those needs. And it comes from being in the field. It comes from sort of the way one lives and the way one has seen things, and comes from conversations and being in community with peers. And and then before I move into this sort of final question, one of the things that I've encountered, and I go back to it, like I was talking about it earlier, as far as my ascension into sort of kind of being a teacher, being a half teacher. Um, when I mention it, or when it's mentioned on my behalf, people light up. They're like, I'm glad that you're doing that. That makes sense. That makes sense for someone like you. It's great, isn't it? It's this, it's that. And or even this notion, I know here there's a sort of like lack of Black male teachers as well. So that's another thing that's kind of there. And, the thing I was sharing, I think before we got started, that initially my commitment was, I'm just going to do this first half. And my arm was twisted. It's like, we kind of need you. You should just stay. You should just stay.
Yeah.
And seeing that and feeling like, one, I was valued and appreciated, and it wasn't this sort of extractive thing. It was just like, no, we want you to be a part of what we're doing here. And it's a mix of folks. And it's not just like, and sort of being introduced to all these different people. It's like this, oh, Rob's a new glossy thing. It's like I'm being prioritized. And it's new for me because I'm shy. I'm a shy extrovert, or what have you. And
I understand that.
so it was just one of those things. So seeing it and being around folks. And so the last thing I'll say, absolutely. When there's a conference or something, any type of conference, it can be a conference for fun. It's like it could be a con, like literally in that
Yeah.
way. And I'm like, I'm exhausted. I'm all funned out. I'm tapped out. Or especially if you're going somewhere, you're learning something. Because I go to data conferences, and
Mm.
I can focus. I can do a lot. My brain is on overload, and it's just I need that moment to kind of be away from people. So that notion of that consideration that's there, it's huge, and that sounds great.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's that. And also, like, if you're exhausted and you're like, you don't have any more in the tank, it also makes it really hard to find community,
Yeah.
right? An authentic community, not where you're like, hello, I'm so and so, take my card. Like, nah, like you just chilling, you're vibing, you're both in a session, and you're like, hey, I really like what you're making. Oh, yeah, well, that's where you teach. Like, that comfortable space. So, I mean, there's so much to it. I think that at least what I wanted it to be. And I feel like that comes into dreaming, right? Freedom dreaming, as it is termed. It's like, how can we create these spaces where like the community norms are understood? And most conferences don't have community norms. Like they're not like, this is how you should be acting, like this is how you should interact with one another. So that like staggered registration, right? Accessible and free registrations, especially to students, like it being tiered, paying presenters, having hospitality like food and things for them, care, thinking about communal care, like in terms of just feeding people, creating spaces for quiet rooms and downtime. And then what else do we do? We just made, and then accessibility needs, right? Like, do we have a community for the deaf? We'll have a signer there and the rest of it. And that's also through more. But I think it is taking our time to not only see each other, but I think to pour into one another, right? So often we think about the labor part, right? Like I feel like we're indoctrinated into that, right? Like, well, how much should I get? Like it's very basic. Like if I'm going to go to this conference, I need to come back with the stuff. And like what stuff? There's so much stuff to come back with, and some of that stuff is joy
Yeah.
and meeting other people and not feeling alone, and then meeting people who are doing like phenomenal work. Like that's my favorite part. So the entire conference is curated. Okay. So I find everybody, I have a relationship with every single presenter, whether I know them or not, I become and I get to know them, keynote everybody. So like the conversations, does that make sense, that happen are beautiful because I'm like, oh, you should meet so-and-so, or like you should really take this, or like I wanted to connect you to this educator. And then it's like this family, right? That starts to form. And I think we need that. We need to know we're not alone during this time period. And someone told me something really beautiful, especially about this upcoming conference, because it's November 8th, 9th, and 10th. And they were like, the way I'm going to be excited to not be in Florida while I'm dealing with what's happening in the country and to be in this community is going to be so restorative for me. Thank you, Flavia. And I was like, I didn't even think about it. Like it was a date that worked. Like I'm just gonna be real with you. It was a date that worked. Like it was a longer weekend so people could travel because I make that travel like work for me, right? Like I'm a single mom. Like I can't be gone that long. So but little things like that I think matter. And so often we're learning not from one another, right? And I think it's really important to keep the community. If like 80% of art teachers are white and female, then that leaves us, only so much, where then that leaves the global majority as a whole.
Yeah.
Okay. And then if you break that down into how everyone identifies, and then like usually the male population is one of the smallest also inside of that, right? So it's like, where is that time for people to meet each other and have those moments where you feel safe? Because we're in those larger environments, we're code switching, like you're not your true self.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. That's that. I guess that's adding voices in a nutshell, for example. Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, I'll say, before this last question is definitely you answered one of the other ones. So that's great. Before I took this thing on, because I had a lot of trepidation and nerves, because it's like, you don't want to give someone bad advice. You don't want to, like in my head, it's like, I don't want to screw these kids up now. And I talked to three educators that I knew through doing this podcast.
Yeah.
And, just really getting their feedback and taking just taking it on, taking the concept of even doing this and asking them. So this notion of community, and just the fact that I happen to know each one of these guys just through doing this podcast.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, cool. This was helpful. And literally they're going out of their way saying, no, this is, you should do this for these reasons. And it's going to be fulfilling. And the other thing I'll say to that point about you were touching on, when folks leave from conventions, or I need to have the things, right? We thinking this sort of cookie cutter approach. That's what we're indoctrinated with, as you touched on. And, when I do this and I'm like, I've enjoyed the conversation. I enjoy having a conversation with people. And it's like, well, how much money did you make from? How many downloads did you get? I was like, I don't care about that. And they look like, people will look at me like I'm bugging. And it's just like, that doesn't matter to me in that way. Sure, you get hooked on occasion, but when you reset and get to sort of your base, it's, with all of the challenges, with all the different things that present themselves, I always go back to my sort of why. And that's the advice that I share, especially in being an educator and doing this piece, as far as crafting a lane for like educating with the sort of podcast thing, not being an audio engineer, but doing the whole macro thing as a podcaster and doing the education component to it. So with my attempt to segue into this sort of final question, so balancing, multiple roles, being a mom, artist, educator, advocate, all of the things that are required of us. I know I was exhausted yesterday. I was over there rambling last night. I was trying to do a podcast. I was like, yeah, blah, blah. What advice would you share with others who are looking to integrate multiple aspects, who are interested in this sort of work and they're trying to balance all of the things? What would be that biggest, that prime piece of advice you would share to someone?
I think it's what my mentors tell me. Seek out mentors, first of all, just period. Like you should have mentors in your life. They're going to come at different times. They're not going to always be who you think they are, but reach out and ask the question. Find the person who you want to ask the question to. What would I tell somebody? You can't do it all. You absolutely can't do it all. I think, when people talk about, you can have a slice, you can have a really good slice, you can't have the whole pie or the cake, but you can have a slice. You have to pace yourself, you have to rest, and you have to have authentic people in your corner, you know? Like you gotta have the people who are gonna like come like in a good way, come for you and be like, I know what you're doing, but you're doing too much and you need to stop. You need that. As much as you need like the hype crew to be like, go, go, go,
Yeah,
you know? And you need both of those people. But I rest a lot. But people say the same thing, like, how much money are you making off the conference? I was like, that's not the point. And they're like, are you doing the conference forever? I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, how do you not know? I'm like, how am I supposed to know everything? Like, I'm out here living life just like you.
yeah.
I don't know what will call me or what is needed. And I think that's where comfortability with self, right? Like, I'm not in it for ego. I do believe our children deserve to learn art in another way that isn't just the elements and the principles of art that allow them to understand where the heart and the soul work are in making, and that art has and remains the most powerful vehicle for human connection, right? Like we've been painting on walls since the beginning of time, and now we be tagging on walls and making murals, and most of those have no written words at all. And that means it's the most accessible way for all of us to connect with one another because there's no hierarchy or issue of access in terms of, right, like reading or things like that. But I think you got to trust your gut, like intuition never lies, and seek out mentors and rest. Like I go through like almost once I do a conference, I'm done for you. That's why they're biannual. I have a whole year of not even thinking about the conference. I just like read books and do my thing. Like it doesn't even pop in my head. You got to rest and you got to be loved on. And that's by like your community and your friends, or if you have partners. I don't have one of those. So yeah, but I mean like people who care about you um, and keep you level headed and joy. My God, do we need joy? In a world today, I think you need joy. And that doesn't mean you got to be irresponsible about it, but like sing and dance and tell the people you love that you love them, right? I think it's the authenticity of life and what you want. It's okay if you don't want to do it anymore. Like if one day I wake up and I say like I don't want to do it anymore and a whole bunch of people come for me, I'll be like, that's not fair. Like it's not fair, right? Like you can be upset, I suppose, but like, I think we also create sustainable practices so other people can carry on our work, right? Like it's a baton game. No one can do this Jedi work as my former teacher, Ronaldo Macias used to call it, like this justice, equity, diversity, inclusion work forever. Like it's draining. Like we need each other and you got to take breaks, right? And you have to also make sure there's enough community, right, to do it. So yeah.
It's a great way to sort of wrap up the real part of the podcast and just definitely very important things that we're touching on. This has been a good one. This has been a good one.
Oh, thank you. I was worried. I was like, I think I'm all over the place. It's the ADHD, but you just
No,
kind
no,
of pull up and you roll with it. It
no,
works.
you're good with it. You're good with it. So I got four rapid fire questions.
Oh, okay.
And because you've probably mentioned multiple of these things during it, so it's a nice little callback, some of these questions.
Okay.
But, as I tell everyone, it's sort of like I said what I said. It's sort of like the briefest version of it because people are like, well, here's the context for why I like, the color blue. It's like, you don't need to give me the context. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So here's the first one. What is your favorite travel destination?
My family's home in Oregon.
Okay. So a lot of times we talk about the cookout That may have been mentioned earlier. We don't play the wall at the cookout. Okay, you're not playing a wall. What's the first thing you're getting to eat at the cookout?
Ribs.
You see, we're friends. We're friends with that too. That's great.
I like the ribs. I mean, but then I got questions about the ribs, but like, it's the ribs. So, whose cookout is it? Right?
That was
Like, there's a
so
lot of
quiet.
questions.
Yo, but who made
A lot
these
of,
though?
a lot of questions. So that's follow up to the follow up. Like, who made this? Whose house am I at?
Usually I'm the guy on the grill. I was in a different state. I went down to Texas for again, a wrestling show. And I was like walking, I'm just, big dude, look at the down dude was like, man, like you need to be behind a grill right now. And I was like, what does that even mean, bro? He's like, I feel like you can throw down. I was like, I can. Thank you for acknowledging me, new stately person. I've never met you, bro. What was the last book you read?
Oh,
Doesn't mean finished. You can like, hey, I just cracked this one open. I'm reading it. This is interesting. Because I'm an audiobook guy, which is kind of cheating. But
I do it all. I don't know. I read like 3 books at a time. That's not a flex. It's like because of the interest of different things. So I just reread Community as Rebellion, A Syllabus for Surviving Academia as a Woman of Color by Dr. Loria Garcia Pena. And then I'm an art person, so I was reading a book looking at a photography book by Jamil Shabazz called The Last Sunday in June.
nice.
So yeah, those are the last things I think I read. And then I read articles and things. But yeah, sci-fi is due again though.
So you will probably appreciate the attempt in this last question then. So
Yeah.
we've talked about Jedi, right? As
Yeah.
it relates to sort of the lane. And we're going to kind of delve into sort of the nerdy, more geekier side to it.
Uh-huh.
So we know who the Jedi are. And when it comes to the education lane and sort of the DEI work lane, who are the Sith?
I feel like that answers itself.
You drank as your response, which is a great answer to that.
Yes, absolutely. I was like, you know who the Sith are.
I thought you'd appreciate that question.
I do. I did appreciate it. My daughter was born on May the 4th. So that's what's
Nice.
kind of, yeah. So she's strong with the Force. Yeah.
One thing that I do, and that was kind of it. One thing that I do.
Okay, I was like, that was strong. Who are the Sith? I don't know. You tell me. The people who call us DEI persons.
One of the things that I did in my first job in higher ed, 'cause that's the industry that I work in mostly. With my first job, I would do this thing I call palpatining. And I would just sit there in the background. I was like, yeah, you should do that, man. Just egging someone on, just in being an agitator in the best, let the hate fuel you.
Oh, Lord. No, I mean, like, whatever journey of the hero we want to use, right? And its larger purpose, or the dichotomies, it's still binary oftentimes, right? And so I think it's like always holding the fact that it's choices people make, right? Like there's no like particularly like good, evil land or, like the Jedi. I think it's how you understand power and how you wield it. And I think that's what comes back into what I say, like, there's not just power over people, there's power like with people. And there's power, within, I know those different hierarchies or concepts of power really to move beyond the hierarchy or the binary are so important, I think, in our community care, right? Like that's how you get community being rebellion, right? Like that's how community can uplift us and care for us, isn't that? But no, I dig that. That was a good question. Who are the Sith? You're funny. That was
Thank you.
solid. That was solid. Like that was like a round of applause style.
Well, thank you. I try.
Yeah.
So in these final moments, there are two things that I would like to do. One, I want to thank you so much for coming on and spending some time with me.
Thank you for asking me.
Absolutely. And two, shameless plugs. Where can folks, check out and, kind of check into adding voices and sort of when that's coming up and, the educators that are listening and all of that good stuff. It's shameless plug time. So anything
All
that
right.
you talk about in these final moments, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Shameless plugs. The Adding Voices conference is coming up November 8th through the 10th. Right now, all Global Majority members can register. So I would get on that right now. We're also looking for sponsors. Sponsors like vary anywhere from $50 to all the way up. So like come through and support us. It's free for all students. That includes high school students. So bring your students if you'd like. Again, it's at Moore College of Art and Design in Philly. I'm not of Philly, but I love me some Philly. So it's been a wonderful home for the conference. This is the second year coming. So you can go to addingvoices.com, Adding Voices Conference on Instagram. If you're looking for me, if you look up Flavia ZW, pretty much on Instagram, I will pop up. I got a website too. What else? I'm running some cohorts for social justice and art education right now, so that art teachers and arts teachers, really, art educators and performing art educators can meet and talk about the work that they're doing and continue to grow. And I have a whole bunch of workshops coming out this August. Let's see, decolonizing your painting curriculum, Black feminist theory in the arts classroom, and I think something on the effect of like equity and social justice in the arts classroom and communal care. So come through. Those are all on Eventbrite, but yeah, it would be great to have anybody in here that's not just global majority, like anybody can come through. All are welcome as long as you're welcoming.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Flavia Zuñiga-West for coming on to the podcast and sharing a bit of her story and telling us about Adding Voices. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.